Welcome to the Rebel Teacher podcast. I'm here today with Sufyan. Some of you might already know him from the Talking Teaching podcast that he did with me a few weeks ago. If you've not seen that, there'll be a link in the show notes down the bottom. So go and check that out first. We had a good chat there. Sufyan told us all about his experiences with homeschooling and some of his plans for the future with education. So it's a really interesting chat, and I recommend you go and check that out. And Sufyan's back with us today. I'm very, very pleased to announce that he's joining us here on the Rebel Teacher Network, and we'll soon be releasing a whole new podcast hosted by Sufyan himself. So Sufyan, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Carl, for the intro. So really, the podcast itself is more going to be like a sort of compilation of some of the quotes and some of the writings that's influenced my thinking around education and personal development, but probably more so on the educational side. So, taking from people like Peter Gray, who's a professor at Boston University, and John Taylor Gatto, who's died now, John Holt, and Carol Dweck as well. There's a whole set of people that's influenced me and sort of brought me to where I am now. So I would think probably like a lot of the stuff would probably be coming from John Taylor Gatto, because I've read both of his books, I think at least 3 or 4 times, at least, and I still listen to it on the audio as well. So so it's really going to be coming from there.
Yeah, good. So he provides a guiding light for you, a North Star for you, does he?
Yeah, absolutely. I think because he just lays everything very, very bare, and his way of putting the points across is just unapologetic, which I think is important. It's not necessarily sort of trying to say something just to be controversial. It's saying something that needs to be said, and if it rubs people up the wrong way, then so be it, because the whole thing is so much more than me. It's more than Gatto. It's more than lots of people. We're talking about the future of human beings. So if people don't like how that comes out, I mean, obviously you can always deliver it in a particular way, but the content itself, it's there to be heard, and it's there for people to provoke thought and to provoke real engagement. But we're looking, sort of action, really. So that's what we're looking for, like massive action.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm, particularly excited about getting this new podcast up and running. Obviously, the first time you and I got in touch was through these quotes that you were sharing, and I'm really excited to hear more of them and to hear more of your thoughts about them as well. And everything you've just said obviously aligns perfectly with what we're trying to do on the Rebel Teacher Network. It's about getting those voices heard by more teachers, getting more teachers on board with these ideas, and as you said, not just the ideas, but taking action, and trying to see change in the classroom and change in the system. So you've mentioned a few different authors there, and obviously over time I'm sure we'll get to hear from more of your collection. What do you think are some of the features that tie them together, some of the commonalities between these different writers that you've mentioned and your favorites?
I think just for the fact the common thread I would say is that it's okay to go in a different direction. It's okay to introduce different formulas, different ways of attaining information, and it's all right to do that. Like, the children are not going to be harmed by that,
right?
And it also sort of shows the weakness of the system, how it can be subverted in very, very simple ways. So I think that's the main thing. I know I get that from Gatto, definitely, and from Peter Gray as well. The main thing to say that this can be changed very, very simply. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say it's an easy fix, because obviously there's lots of other stuff, smaller moving parts that go into it. But on the main, in general, it's a very, very easy fix. And I said I wasn't going to say that. So it is very it's very simple to make the changes.
Right. Yeah. And especially, I mean, like you say, talking about a fix is to look at the system as a whole, right? And I think you and I and most of the people who are on the network and a lot of the people who are following our podcasts and our content here on the network would, I think, agree pretty quickly that the system is broken in a lot of different ways. And when you talk about a fix, obviously it's about trying to fix that system, which feels like a massive challenge perhaps. But as you say, you know, making a change is a very simple thing, right? When we talk about making a change, we're talking about individuals, right? And you and I as educators can change the way that we practice, you know, change the things that we do in the classroom and out of the classroom. And the same goes for anybody who's watching this or anybody who's following the channel. Obviously, if you just make a small change in your day-to-day practice as a teacher, that's quite simple, right? And if enough teachers are making those small changes, then we might eventually see bigger fixes, bigger changes happening on the system level. But I think that's not necessarily the goal that we have, you know, tonight, tomorrow, as you said. You know, the big fixes are we hope, an accumulative process. So some of those smaller things. Do you have any ideas off the top of your head? What one or two of those kind of what are some small changes that you think an individual teacher could make?
I think just on a really basic level, just on language.
Yeah.
You know, like how do you communicate with your students? You know, like what kind of words are you conditioning them with? You know, are you saying, you know, you've got to do your work now? You know, you have to
right.
sit still. You have to stop moving. You know, like it's very easy to just say those things, but it's quite difficult to sort of actually, well, can I actually say that same, can I get that point across just by using one or two different words? And then in that way, you know, I might get something more out of my students. So I think the first thing that is quite tangible is just language. You know, just think of what you're saying. Is there a need? Do I need to tell my children shush? Or can I say the same thing, but can I just do it a little bit differently? You know, can I just sort of bring it down, get them involved, make it interactive? Don't seem like they're, not to make the children feel like they're always in trouble.
Right.
So if I call their name, you know, to just maybe use eye contact or, you know, use gestures or something like that, as opposed to, because sometimes if you're always talking and trying to get the point across, if it's not getting across, then that's where the frustration builds. So I think language is the first one, and it's huge.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you said that. I think that couldn't be a more perfect example for what we're looking for, actually, because as you say, I mean, it's so small in terms of a personal change, in terms of, you know, changing the mindset and making that change, but the impact there is huge. I mean, I observed a lesson just last week, and it was a physics lesson. It was about electrolysis, I think. It wasn't a lesson I was particularly attracted to, but I remember the teacher saying after a fairly lengthy, not especially engaging presentation, and the teacher then asked the students, "Are you confused yet?" And I thought, well, that's it's not the way that I would want to phrase that question. And I spoke to the teacher afterwards, and, you know, he's just kind of thought, yeah, you know, he's familiar, he's used to his students kind of saying, no, oh, this is confusing. And so he was preempting their confusion. Is anybody confused yet? So can't you imagine if you just turned that around and said, you know, is everybody okay with this? It's the same question. It's a completely opposite choice of words, you know, but it's skewing it positively. And, you know, we talked about some different ways of asking questions and making sure that the students are giving a helpful response. But just like you said there, the language of reinforcing confusion, these are things that, you know, I think just fall out of our mouths sometimes as teachers. We you know, we've got speech patterns, we've got things that we're used to hearing, we've got ideas that we don't best know how to get across, and the words sometimes come out without any thought, and we don't realize how impactful that can be on the students. So I think that's a perfect place to start. It's a really good example.
Yeah, the thing is as well, like you said, you know, what happens is that from Monday to Friday, the students are getting this same, you know, language, roughly the same, not exactly the same as all the time, but they're roughly getting the same. So that in and of itself is a form of conditioning. So when they're used to that now, if like a new teacher or a supply teacher comes in and their approach is completely different, the students are kind of like, well, I don't really know how to really respond to this now. Is it okay?
Yeah.
And if the teacher has a way of trying to deliver a lesson where it's like, I'm happy if you make mistakes. We're not in a rush. We're not like on a deadline. You know, when you get it done, you get it done. You know, and that type of language and that type of freedom there is something that children are not used to. For example, I think I said before when we spoke last time, when my children when we were homeschooling, we had to unschool them. So all the stuff that they had learned and everything that they had heard at school, we just had to just not say it. So there was no such thing as homework. There was no such thing as, you know, we've only got 10 minutes left. Like all that sort of stuff was just gone. So then it took them a while, and took me a while as well. And us at home, there was to be like, okay, we can let go of those types of speech because there's no need for that. So by extension, you should be able to carry that on into learning environment, you know? So all stuff like, you know, like classroom, even just that itself, class, separating of the classes, you know, like this, you know, you got like foundation level, you know, higher level. Like, why is there a need for that? Some children,
and just no interaction between those either, you know.
There's none. There's none. And then that obviously, when in and of itself, creates a rivalry, because some children will inadvertently resent the children that are in
and some teachers promote that, right? You know, again, not intending to be negative, but they, you know, they think they're inspiring some healthy competition. You know, you're better than my class last year, or, you know, you're better than the B class, the A class. None of it's intended to create conflict. I think it's intended positively, but it's not just the children that come to that conclusion. The teachers do the same, make the same mistake there.
And it's very easy to do because, you know, we have to remember that, you know, we all went to school ourselves, you know, the most of us. So, you know, we've had our experiences, and some teachers are just trying to be like, well, I had this negative experience, so I don't want these to go through it. So then they obviously do what they think is right, but then sometimes it can actually have the opposite effect sometimes. So it's just about, you know, and then the other thing is as well, sometimes we have to remember that, you know, parents are always, some teachers are parents as well.
Of course.
So it's like, well, the way that I'm speaking to this student, would I be happy if I heard a teacher speaking to my son or daughter in the same way?
So one of the teachers I'm coaching at the moment, we had exactly that conversation. She's, as are, you know, a lot of teachers now, teaching online because of the pandemic. And I was coaching her through a couple of sessions, and she was doing a good job of trying to break the monotony and trying to break the pattern that a lot of the other teachers on her faculty were still, you know, towing the line of the older, the very traditional approach, doing things online exactly the same as they're doing them in the classroom, and really just seeing the students, you know, bored and disengaged, disconnected. And this teacher that I'm coaching, she was trying to do things quite differently, and I was impressed. And I said, you know, where are you getting this from? And she said, you know, very much related to what you've just said. She said, look, I'm a teacher here, but I have my own daughter. So I've got you know, I see my daughter just in the room, you know, upstairs. I see her on her laptop all day, just, you know, having the teachers drone mindlessly at her all day, and she hates it. And I thought, is that what I'm doing to my students, the same as she's getting from her teacher? And so by seeing what her daughter was going through, that's what inspired her to change what she was doing for her students. And it was such a, you know, dramatic change that I saw, and it was inspired by exactly as you just said, you know, many teachers happen to have their own kids, right? Absolutely right.
Yeah. So that's the thing, you know. So I would say that the first thing would definitely be language, because it just fits into everything, you know. And we can't be lazy about it, because, like I said, we have to remember that these children are not going to be 12 all their lives. They're not going to be 16 all their lives. They're going to grow into adults, and then they're going to repeat the stuff that what they say. Well, if they accept how they were spoken to as young people by people in positions of trust, then they're going to think, well, some of them will think, well, that's actually okay. and
Yeah,
then
I can
they'll
always
just
be
carry
spoken
on.
to. Yeah, exactly
Yeah,
right.
so then they'll just either accept that it's okay to be spoken to like that,
Yeah,
or perpetuate the same thing. So
yeah,
at some
yeah.
point,
That's so true.
a line's got to get drawn. So I think we should
Yeah,
just start.
and there's something there. There's another irony there that I'd not really thought about before that you've just kind of raised, is that we often, as a system, we take kids from a very young age in the whatever we call it, nursery, pre-K, kindergarten, all these kind of early years programs where we pick the kids up, and so often they are forced to grow up too quickly, right? They're not allowed to play. They're not allowed to just have the freedom to run around. They've got to follow the schedule. They've got a regimented program. They've got to meet the objectives and follow the curriculum from a very young age. We take them out of their play state and put them into the learning model. So we're bypassing their childhood. But then after that point, we refuse to let them grow up. We refuse to treat them like adults at a later date, So we're kind of boxing them in. They can't be kids. They can't be adults. We're putting them in this kind of strange limbo where the whole model is just about basically doing as they're told, right?
But then the other thing from that is, whilst they're in that little moment of limbo, they're also being told, well, you should know this already. They're also being told, well, you got exams in 2 years. You got your GCSEs or your level plus or your SATs or whatever it is. So you should know this. And then it's just like, but then there's the other thing that's being bypassed. It's just like, well, how are you feeling?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Like, what's happening today? What's going on? Like, how are things different? Like, how comes you're a little bit more quiet today? And sometimes, and the thing is as well, is I think we said before, it's not about teacher bashing, because the system itself currently in its current state doesn't allow the time for a teacher who would want to, and I'd hazard a guess 98% of teachers would want to sit down for 2 to 3 minutes a day with every one of their students and say, are you all right today? Are you sure everything's okay? And obviously most of them are going to be, no, everything's fine, but they don't know my teacher actually is bothered about how I am.
It opens the door, right?
Yeah, it's not only just about how much did I score on my test, and am I making the teacher look good? Because some teachers are like, they give the impression, and quite blatantly sometimes, that it's them who should be the ones that the children should be looking to impress.
Right. Yeah. Right. Certainly not the other way around. Right.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, well, where did you get that idea from? So then the teacher, then the child who's trying really hard and thinking, well, I'm under pressure at home because I've got X amount of homework and I've got a tutor and I've got this and I've got that, but I've also got a teacher that I need to impress as well. And then obviously my partner who's sitting next to me and my partner sitting the other side of me, they're much better at me than this.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And something else that you talked about how the system can be very limiting. Teachers that maybe want to change, but the system doesn't allow for it in a lot of ways. I think it's worth adding, said a few minutes ago, how change can be easy, right? It can be very easy to make that small change. I think it's worth adding there that while it's easy to make that change, it's much harder to persist, to persevere. Because I think a teacher can go into the classroom, go into the school on a Monday morning and think, right, I'm going to try something different today. And they'll give it a go. But if it's not immediately met with, positive results, or if it's not accepted by the students, or even worse, often they're getting kind of askant glances from the other teachers who are questioning why they're doing things differently. Then it's easy to kind of fall back and say, okay, well, I'll just go back to the way things were. I think trying something new is perhaps easy, but keeping it up and persisting when maybe the results take time to be seen, and maybe not everybody will get on board straight away, and you might feel like it's just you that's doing things a different way, and that might not necessarily be well received. That perhaps is the harder part, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the consistency, with anything that you're doing, if it's fitness, if it's, drinking a walk every day, whatever it is, the consistency is the most important thing. And like you said, you could have a teacher, you could have 5 or 10 teachers in one institution that are just like, okay, that's it. Like, we've had enough now. And Monday, next, we're just doing it. And then one come, sort of 2 days thinking, it's like, it's not happening. And then that filters down, and then you might have one or two stragglers at, come Friday thinking, this is because the system is like a behemoth,
Yeah.
So you would then have to really separate yourself, like literally. Well, we have to establish our own institution. I don't even like that word, but we have to establish our own offering.
Yeah.
Because if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to do it, because
Yeah.
we won't have enough. Because like I said, even if the kids are on it, some kids might be on it. You might, let's say you've got 10 classes, 8 of them classes, all the kids are on it. But like you said, you've got other teachers just thinking, what are you trying to do? Why are you trying to do this? It's not going to work. And like you said, giving the glances of like, well, we've done our tests and our kids are scoring this and yours ain't.
Yeah.
So what is it that you really, is what you're doing really working? We ain't got the time. So all of that, I think it's not the easiest way, but the best way is to just start something yourself, because you're going to be in the environment of like-minded people. The parents are going to understand what it's about. The children are going to understand what it's about. So therefore, you're going to have that time to, go through it. And some kids are just on the thing where they just want to see what it's like. They want to see, is everyone else on it?
Yeah.
They actually want to see, do you actually really know what you're doing? Are you organized?
Right. Exactly right. Yeah.
Really, do you really believe in this thing? Like if it's a thing where there's 70% of us that are thinking that this is a lot of rubbish, are you still going to persist next week? And then when you're back next week, then they're just like, okay, they give it a go. So yeah, you're right. The persistence is hard, because it's more of like, it's obviously a physical effort, but it's more of like a psychological and emotional effort, because you're putting everything of your kind of dream into this. And if you don't get the reception, you don't get the support, because remember, some teachers are very, very, very results based. And it's about, what the results are, and that's all that matters. There are some that are some great teachers that are got a good combination of the two. You understand what the system needs, and they fulfill that part, but their greater focus is the well-being of the children.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think it's about building a reputation. And I think for teachers, it's a scary idea to have a reputation, because teachers don't get into the profession to become famous or to become well known. They're not about building a brand or an image or a profile. They're there to educate. And I think a lot of teachers just kind of fit into the background, right? And the scary thing when you go out and try something new is you might get a bad reputation, right? If it doesn't work, or if it's not liked, then you'll very quickly end up, or the fear perhaps is that you'll very quickly end up with a bad reputation. Students don't like you, the school doesn't appreciate you, and so chasing a good reputation comes at a risk perhaps. But my experience, certainly in my own career and my own choices, but with many of the teachers that I've worked with as well, is that persistence almost always leads to positive results. It's just getting over the wrinkle of change. Change is always a bit of a tricky transition to introduce something new. People have to learn what it is. People have to get used to it. And during that time, it's likely that results might dip a little bit. People might not fully get what's going on. And if you break it in that period, if you stop doing it at that moment, then everybody will look back on it and go, oh, do you remember that week where the teacher tried something and it was confusing and it was terrible? And, and that's the idea that's the memory that they have. But if you push through that, keep it up a second and a third lesson, it starts to stabilize, it starts to normalize, the kids get on it, they know what it is, and then they look back on it and go, oh, can you believe we used to do it that different way before we did this new thing? And everything, it's just about breaking through that transition and persisting, that I think is particularly important.
No, for true. There are, if you're doing so, you have to be really, really wholeheartedly into whatever that change is.
Right. Yeah.
And like I said, I don't know what it's like in Indonesia, but I know over here, as you well know, the whole thing about, you know, the GCSEs and the SATs and
Yeah.
the 11 plus and all this and the other,
Yeah.
because the connotations are, you know, private school or grammar school or university. It's not even so much about jobs. It's more about another layer. So because that's been ingrained and we've just accepted it for decades and, you know,
Yeah.
centuries almost, we just accepted that's the way it is.
Yeah.
So to try to get people to even just think about doing that differently for any length of time, you know, more than 2 weeks, and you've already got people looking at the ceiling, just like, oh, for goodness sake, are they still going on about it? We got exams to do, we got exams to prepare for,
right.
you know, and then kids who are like, okay, that's good, but I got to do my tutoring, I've got to do my, you know, I've got to prepare for my test. So it's a huge battle, but so that's why I always say you kind of got to do it separately. Like you can't really do it from within unless you get like a group of schools that are like, we've kind of got the permission to do away with the national curriculum at our behest, and we're going to completely do it differently. We're going to be in the same building, same rooms, everything else, but when the children come through the door, we're doing it differently, and we've got parents that are on board. So they may even do it on a thing where it's like, you know, like when you do like research. Yeah. You say, okay, cool, we're going to get 10 kids and they're going to do it a different way. Yeah. And that's how we're going to do it like that. And then you just see what happens. So,
and then you're appealing to the traditional model as well then, right? You're doing something different, but you're doing it in the framework of research, and it feels a bit more kind of feels a bit more official. So I think you're right about that, certainly when it comes to the bigger things. But again, you know, it's those smaller things that can be done within the curriculum. I mean, your first example of language, you know, and things like the way we give feedback to the students and these things, you know, a teacher can do that in his or her own classroom. But even then, you know, you talked about a network or a collection of schools. Even when we're talking about these smaller things, I think it's helpful to have you know, a network of teachers, and that might not be in your school. I think that, again, as we've said, that's the hard thing, is you might feel in your institution that you're the only one kind of going against the tide and doing things a bit differently. You might not feel like you've got much support. So hopefully, of course, that's what the Rebel Teacher Network is about, is hopefully we can bring that level of support to those teachers who want to try something different and maybe feel like they're in, you know, a very kind of static type of institution. They might feel like they're not getting much support, but hopefully they can find that support with the teachers on the network, and with some of the, you know, the material that we're putting out, hopefully will help them. And I'm really excited for your podcast to be part of that, and for teachers to hear, you know, some of the writers that you've mentioned will be you know, familiar to some of our teachers. There'll be some teachers who've probably never heard of them, or certainly, you know, heard of them but not read their books. So it'll be great to get those ideas out to teachers who haven't heard them before. But I really like the twist of then, you know, you're exploring some of these from your own perspective and some different perspectives, and, you know, opening up a conversation with perhaps people on the network. So it's not just about, you know, okay, well, yeah, that's a nice tweet and a nice quote for an Instagram thing, but it's a conversation. It's exploring how to put these into practice. And I'm really excited to see what kind of an impact that can have and what kind of a change that can lead. So I'm looking forward to it. Anything else to say about the podcast, and to get people, you know, excited for it coming up, I guess sometime next week, perhaps, for the first episode?
Yeah, I think definitely next week will be the first episode, all being well. I think just the main thing, I think, for people to sort of look out for, listen out for, is just, you know, just to prepare yourselves to, you know, hear things that are going to probably be uncomfortable, because even if you're in this space, you know, we've all sort of been part of the system one way, shape or form, and we've all probably done stuff and we think, this isn't right for the children, but we've just had to do it. So I think those are the things that I'll be sort of bringing up, but it's not to make people feel belittled or anything else. It's more just to say, this is something that is general. this is something that lots of people have been through, lots of people have done, but now we're actually in a space where we can actually do something about it. Like, it is actually possible. And I know, you know, we could be thinking, you know, pie in the sky to some people, but I think the biggest thing is to know that it's possible. It's possible to do. So I think, the biggest thing is probably more, I mean, like one of the biggest ones for me is something from Gatto's called the 7 Lesson School Teacher. I mean, you can even Google it. And when I read those 7 lessons, I said to myself, like, that happened to me. Like, that was my school experience.
Right.
And it happens now, you know, and he wrote that book in the 90s. So we're talking about 20 or nearly 30 odd years.
Yeah.
But it still happens up to today, like every single lesson. And some teachers who are teaching currently may find some of that stuff uncomfortable to hear, but just to know that I'm not trying to teacher bash at all. That's not really like my thing. It's more just this is the stuff that's out there. Have a think about it, get together with others, and let's really do something. It's more to instigate change, like real change, you know.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I'm really excited, and I hope the viewers, the listeners are too. So I want to remind everybody to follow the podcast, sign up and follow the YouTube channel. The new podcast from Sufyan, the QuotED podcast, will be available on the YouTube Rebel Teacher Network channel. So if you subscribe today, if you're not already, then you'll be there when it's released, and you'll be among the first to hear it. And we'll be releasing it on a podcast as well for those of you who prefer to listen. So it'll be easy to get to, easy to access, and I think it'll be very interesting and hopefully lead to a lot of change. So thanks a lot, Sufyan, and I look forward to episode 1.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. Brilliant. Hopefully we can make some big changes.